Kia ora, and welcome to my presentation on the case study analysis of the ANZ Bank. My name is James Owen. I'm an MBA student in MBA M601, and I'm looking forward to walking you through my presentation. My presentation today is going to cover three main areas. First is digital disruption itself and some definitions around disruption and turbulence. Then we'll look at the Agile transformation itself through the lens of the Kotter's 8 steps to transformational change process. And then I'm going to look at some ethical issues and stakeholders both internally and externally that will likely be affected by the changes of the transformation. I'll start the presentation today by outlining Moore's Law and why Moore's Law is important in framing the discussion around transformation of ANZ Bank. So Moore's Law states that the number of transistors on a microchip roughly doubles every 2 years, creating an exponential increase in computing power. This exponential growth has enabled new competitors to enter an industry that was traditionally the realm of a few large market players. And of course, banks are a case in point of that. The technology that is emerging is being used in new and novel ways by competitors from unique industries, and has been in a deceptive phase in where its growth hasn't outperformed conventional business models. However, that is now changing, and we're seeing disruption to conventional ways of doing business as these new models come into the market. So what is digital disruption and why does it matter to ANZ Bank? Well, first of all, disruption is easy to spot. As new technologies begin to become cheaper and more widely available to society, new business offerings appear as people leverage the functionalities of these new technologies in new and novel ways. So digital disruption is effectively new business models affecting old business models. There's entry from new customers in new and ingenious ways that challenge existing practices and operations. These often have very few physical assets and leverage the new technologies at low cost. This can often mean that they can grow very quickly as the marginal cost of increasing customer base is very low. Digital turbulence, however, is less easy to spot. It's more subtle. So examples of digital turbulence include a continual increase in growth of income, but declining in profits. Market share might also remain the same. Even in the face of those increased profits, you still end up with the same market share. An increased incidence of new competitors emerging from non-traditional industries, sometimes completely unrelated, sometimes related. For example of that is peer-to-peer lending and how that's disrupting conventional business. So you don't no longer have to go walk down to the bank to get money. You can go to other people to get that. So what does this mean for ANZ Bank on a technological front and also on a social front? Combinations of these digital technologies have unintended consequences, and they begin to work with each other, further exacerbating the exponential growth of them. And as a result, time becomes a more valuable commodity. It becomes compressed, and being able to go to market with something quickly is more valuable to a business and to customers. There's also less defined market segmentation, particularly from the entry of non-traditional industries into the financial industry, which all gives rise to uncertainty as these new competitors emerge. From a social point of view, changing customer behaviour and the ways in which people interact with banks, digital maturity of customers, and the ways in which they interface with financial technologies is changing all of the time. Demographics are also driving change behind the banking industry transformation. But one of the big things which we'll focus on a little bit during this analysis is the toxic culture that's been talked about at ANZ Bank. Under Mike Smith, there was many incidences of professional misconduct, lack of oversight, which meant that staff were not held accountable for their actions, all while collecting large salaries. And frankly, I know that's one thing in the public domain that people hold very little sympathy for is when banks behave badly, people get up in arms about it very, very quickly. So I think there's a little bit of healthy discontent that's held towards banks, and rightly so, given some of the carryings on that were outlined in the case study. So we've established that there's a case for change. The CEO, Shane Elliott, started in early 2016 with a vastly different style to leadership than his incumbent, and set about transforming his business to make it ready for the future. With changing social expectations, addressing the toxic culture, increased regulation and intervention from government and outside bodies, but also dealing with the changing customer expectations and the ways in which customers and businesses were interacting with banks. That can be nicely illustrated using this customer value map here on the right. And as we can see that decreasing prices coupled with increased functionalities gave rise to lots of new fintech businesses in the good deal zone, leaving poor old ANZ stranded high and dry in the fair deal zone. And eventually the market shifts down towards that good deal zone, leaving ANZ a little bit high and dry. But how would ANZ respond to such wide-scale changes which were about to be unleashed on the business? So to find out how effective the transformation was, I'm going to use Kotter's 8 steps of change model. I really like this model because it gives a reasonably detailed description of how wide-scale change can be laid out and implemented in the business, but it also gives room for interpretation and discussion as well. So there are 3 main phases, and I'll walk through those one by one. So we've got the first phase, create a climate for change. Second phase, engage and enable. And finally, implementing and sustaining of those changes. Step 1, establish a sense of urgency. In today's world, the only thing you can really do as CEO with any lasting impact is the impact that you have on culture. Change is happening fast. If ANZ is going to be successful, we have to transform our 180-year-old business. That's a quote from the CEO, and to me that signals a really strong intention that things need to change. Ongoing scandals, poor performance, and all of the other incidents listed in the case study really paint a picture that it's time to transform a very old business. He goes on to say that the reputation's been tarnished and we need to get back some of that consumer trust, and that also customer expectations are being shaped by their experiences with Amazon and Apple. And in order to keep pace with that, there needs to be a rethink and a bringing of the business into the 21st century. So to me, that signals absolutely yes, the first stage of Kotter's 8 steps of change has been satisfied. It's worthy of a tick. Step 2, forming a powerful guiding coalition. From the information that we've received in the case study, it appears again that this has happened. We know that Catherine Bray was appointed to lead the transformation, and the work was organised into 4 streams: services, connectivity, agility and culture. Now it's easy in hindsight to read the case study and realise that culture is one of the big sticking points that needs to be addressed. And of course, the frozen middle is something that needs to be strongly focused on in order to make this change successful. The only part of this part that I question is how some of the leadership will respond to being able to walk the walk and embody the change during the coming transformation, particularly when their own roles have been disestablished or affected in quite significant ways. So provided that can be addressed and you've got the right people in place, then that help to embody the change, then this I think also warrants a tick on the process. Create a vision. Step 3. That appears to have happened as well. The vision seems to have centered around establishing 3 values, for which the first is to become a better part of society, strengthening relationships with the customers to inspire people, embracing digital technology to create better experiences with customers and people, and also to transform the financial performance of the bank by becoming simpler, better capitalized, and basically better balanced. Now things start to get a little bit hairy and a bit murky for me. Changing a traditional hierarchical structure into a collaborative, more flatter structure, breaking teams into squads and tribes operating with autonomy. And this is company-wide, so a very, very wide-scale transformation and change in what is unfamiliar to a lot of members in the bank, members of staff. The vision was to change the organisational structure to flatter, more collaborative, and I find this a little bit troubling at this point because the wholesale changes require strong leadership and embodiment from senior staff, yet the case study points out that these new highly skilled IT staff were being asked to reapply for their jobs, being put into new teams, working in new ways, with new lines of reporting, all with urgency, and I find that to be quite a tough pill to swallow, particularly for a business like a bank that was reasonably stable and a very old business and 180 years old. So despite what I said in the previous slide, I've still given point number 3, create a vision, a tick. I think there was a vision that was created, it was well defined, and it was clear. So that satisfies the requirement for that. So it's got a green tick, and we're on to communicate the vision. So this was a large-scale restructuring of the workforce that focused on more agility, enabling its teams to act with autonomy, and a shift away from producing highly customizable and expensive products for customers and moving towards more of a speed focus, which to me, I think that's a good thing. that signals awareness of what the market wants and adjusting your business model to cope with that. However, I think actions speak louder than words, and the change that was to come was going to prove a little bit of a hard sell, and especially when it comes to ICARE, the ICARE philosophy of integrity, collaboration, accountability, respect, and excellence. Particularly when those are some of your founding values in which you work, and you want your staff to embody those when you have to start reapplying for your job and you're asking questions of how you can deliver in this new way, particularly when your previous way of doing business in a 180-year-old company was seeming to be okay, and you've satisfied, or you've been quite successful in that as an employee. I think you're going to have questions. And my question to the CEO around this framework is, can you communicate that vision within 5 minutes? I'm not sure that's going to be possible. People will have a lot of questions. Step number 5, empowering others to act on the vision. For me, this is where things start to become a little bit murky for the CEO in his agile transformation. By all accounts, this was quite ruthless, and management staff that had been part of the organisation for many years were selected on their ability to work collaboratively. And by all accounts, one thing that stood out to me was the quote, "This is a highly metabolic rate way of working." To me, that just sounds a little bit exhausting. And there doesn't appear to have been any opportunity to push pause, consolidate, take some stock, evaluate the new ways of doing things, and revisit. It's just been bang, bang, bang all the way through. However, there has been increased contact with customers from different members of the team, not just the traditional account manager point of contact. So that will provide some feedback, and I think that is a good part of this empowering others to act on the vision, is getting customer feedback. This is the collaboration style of change, and I think that's to be commended and encouraged at this point. However, realigning of performance incentives, particularly for staff, it doesn't appear to have happened at this point, although it does say in the case study that there were rewards for those that were able to adopt a growth mindset and who were willing to try new stuff to improve. I think that's going to be a very hard sell still. We've got a really old traditional way of working in a bank. We've asked people to reapply for their jobs, and by the way, you need to be okay with failing. I think that's quite a hard thing to do, and to me it says that there's a little bit of underestimation of the rate or the scope of the cultural change that needed to happen in this organisation, particularly when there's mention of the fabled frozen middle. I think there needed to be a lot more work done in that frozen middle, empowering of those people. It did talk about management offering support to that frozen middle, but I think support and empowerment are two different things. The other thing which I think goes against empowering people to act on the vision is that the funding model wasn't updated to reflect the new way of working. So new expectations were placed on new teams without the appropriate level of funding being made available to them. And as we know, culture trumps strategy all day long, as is evidenced by Pac-Man over here on the right. So we're on to session 6 now. We've got 3 green ticks. We've got 2 orange question marks. Can the CEO get this transformation back on track by planning for and creating short-term wins? I'm not sure that this is quite a short slide, actually. I don't think this has been addressed much at all. If it has been, we haven't been given much information about it in the case study. So it's important to recognise and reward employees' efforts, particularly considering the scope of change that has gone on. And I think it ties nicely together with the previous slide saying that performance incentives need to be aligned with the scope of change. Again, that doesn't seem to have happened. So for me, this is a bit of a red flag, and I think it warrants another question mark. In May 2019, the CEO pushed pause on the Agile transformation, and I think the organisation itself may have breathed a collective sigh of relief as the change came to a grinding halt for just a little bit, a chance to take a breath and take a little bit of stock. So profit steady. Let's talk about the increased credibility. The profit was steady and then it's dropped. So for mine, the credibility from shareholders hasn't risen much. So you've undergone this big transformation and it hasn't produced results that we want. They've hired dedicated employees, but also many staff had to reapply for their roles as downsizing occurred, and that's one of the dreaded D words in business when you, from an employee point of view, downsizing signals only bad things for people and a lot of change. But in terms of reinvigorating the change with even more new initiatives and accelerating the change even more, I think this is an opportunity to take stock and say, okay, where are we at? What's happening, and where do we go in the future? What changes do we need to make to our transformation to ensure that we're still adding value for customers, that employees still feel valued, and that we're still responding to the market in ways which will enable us to be competitive in the future. Step 8, institutionalizing new approaches. I think at this point, while we've hit pause in our transformational journey, it's important to articulate the connection between changes that we've made and performance markers. So are we seeing improvements in our business performance? That was one of the reasons that we started. Are our customers feeling like we're delivering better on what we set out to achieve, and communicating those back to the team so that we all get an idea of whether we're on the right track. This is also the first time at this stage in our transformational journey that there's been mention of broad strokes versus long marches. As we've seen, there's been lots and lots of broad strokes and wholesale changes throughout the business, but this is the first time that's been alluded to that this is a long march, and people need to be used to this idea of constantly falling forward and adapting to change as the future. We still know that culture beats strategy all day long, and I think even at this point there needs to be a little bit of internal looking to get an idea of the health and morale of our employees that have just undergone a drastic change. Has the transformation worked? Where are we now, and where are we going? My belief is that the transformation has succeeded to a degree. As we've got on the left, we've got 3 green ticks and 5 orange question marks. I think there are elements of the transformation that appear to have gone well, and certainly the intention has been there, but I think there are certainly areas of consideration, particularly the impact on staff, empowering them to understand the change and how they are going to be a part of that change. I think that could have been addressed a little bit more, and that will go a long way to bringing them along for this transformational journey. To add to this, my concern at this pause moment is change fatigue for our employees. The continual changes to the organisation structure creates considerable change fatigue. Coupled that with the high metabolic rate way of working will create an environment of great variety, but also an environment of constant flux, and that is really, really hard to stay motivated and engaged and keep energy levels up in that point. So I think there's a real case here for pushing pause, taking a bit of stock, refreezing, and establishing a new direction and way forward based on the feedback that comes as a result of the pause. I also think that there's been an underestimation in the extent of change and the effect of that change on the frozen middle of the organisation. I think there's multiple ways in which this transformation could have been achieved without necessarily upending the entire business all in one go. Having said that though, the heavy lifting has been now done, and with appropriate alterations, review and consolidation, I think the foundation has been set for the Agile transformation to lift ANZ's performance in the future. What do the numbers tell us? Well, at this stage, I think it's a little early to draw too many conclusions. One that is of particular interest to me is the credit impairment charge. It seems to have halved, and that may signal a change in appetite from the bank towards lending and being more responsible with who it lends to and how much. So that's one conclusion which we may draw. There also still appears to be some evidence of digital turbulence, but that may be offset by the increased cost or extra cost incurred as a result of the ongoing transformation. Finally, a discussion on the ethical considerations of the transformation at ANZ Bank. I'd like to start with my definition of what I think ethics are in this particular scenario. Ethical decision making is the ability to judge between right and wrong, paying particular attention to morality, legality, culture and values that are embedded in an organisation. That's what I consider to be ethics in this context. And I think there's a real balance that needs to be struck between what is morally acceptable but also responsible, while making sure that any actions undertaken are in fact legal. Is it responsible for a business owner to reshape their business in response to changing market conditions? Absolutely. So therefore, provided that staff are treated morally fairly and within the confines of the law when it comes to things like restructuring and being made redundant and being asked to reapply for new roles, provided that's done legally and with a certain amount of compassion and empathy, then I think that is an unfortunate outcome, but it doesn't signal a failure in the transformation in that sense. From my point of view, I hark back to a lecture that I did in a previous course where there was a difference made between a market failure in an economic term, but also an outcome that we don't like. People are hurt and livelihoods are affected in the course of this ANZ transformation, but it doesn't necessarily signal a sign of market failure. It's unfortunate, but provided it's done legally, the question then becomes whether it's morally right to do that, given particularly the tenure at which some of these staff members have given to the ANZ Bank in the time that they've been there. Internal and external stakeholders. I think a real big consideration here is data security and whether external customers, how they feel about their data needing to be made more accessible and available through these new Agile teams at ANZ Bank. It's quite a different way of doing things. Traditionally, the realm of IT and those that needed to see the information, but of course in a flat structure, it's probably more widely available to people across the organisation, and there are ethical considerations around availability and security of that data and whether it needs to be widely accessible to all of those people. In terms of social responsibility, I think the founding visions that gave a base to the transformation itself, I think they stand to provide a really good foundation. And in that sense, I think ethics of the transformation are acceptable, and that provided that the feedback from customers is taken into consideration as to whether the transformations work, then yes, ethical considerations have been listened to and have been considered when determining where the transformation goes from here. So thank you very much. This brings me to the end of my presentation on the Agile transformation of ANZ Bank. I do hope you've enjoyed the presentation and that I've conveyed accurately some of what I've learned during the course. Thank you, and I'll see you in class.